Thank you, gentlemen. I'd now like to introduce our second panel of witnesses. Sean Moulton is Director of the Open Government Policy Center for Effective Government. He is the author of several reports on open government and transparency. Kevin L. Goldberg is an attorney and is here representing the American Society of News Editors and the Sunshine in Government Initiative. Thomas Blanton is the director of the National Security Archive, an independent research institution at George Washington University. Thank you all for joining us. Your complete written testimonies will be made part of the record. You each have 5 minutes for any opening remarks that you'd like to make. Mr. Moulton, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on the important topic of fulfilling the promise of open government, the impacts of the Open Government Act, and agency performance on FOIA. My name is Sean Moulton. I'm the Director of Open Government Policy at the Center for Effective Government, formerly OMB Watch, an independent, nonpartisan policy organization. Improving citizen access to public information has been an important part of our work for almost 30 years. I'd like to begin with a quick look at FOIA implementation. Today we published our analysis of FOIA performance at 25 agencies, including most cabinet-level departments. Our analysis evaluated performance on processing of requests, the rates of requests granted, and the use of exemptions. In fiscal year 2012, the Obama administration processed more FOIA requests than in any year since 2004. Specifically, the 25 agencies processed more than 512,000 requests, an 8% increase over the previous year. As a result, 12,000 fewer requests were still pending at the end of the year, a 12% decline compared to 2011. Nevertheless, more than 80,000 requests remained unprocessed at year's end. In terms of granting requests, 19 of the 25 agencies fully denied requests less than 10% of the time. The Department of Homeland Security denied requests less than 1% of the time. Not surprisingly, the Central Intelligence Agency and State Department were the most likely to fully deny requests, rejecting 59% and 44% respectively. Overall, in 2012, agencies granted in full or in part 94% of requests processed. However, the administration's performance continues to rely much more heavily on partial releases rather than full releases. In fact, granting in full declined to the lowest level on record to just under 41%. Conversely, partially granted requests are at a near record high. And based on the information reported, we are unable to say just how partial these releases were. We could be talking about releasing 99 documents out of 100 or withholding 99 documents and only releasing 1. Both would be a partial grant. We also found that the total use of exemptions rose by 26% from the previous year. 3 exemptions accounted for almost 3/4 of exemptions used: personal privacy, law enforcement personal privacy, and law enforcement techniques for prosecution. Each were used approximately 100,000 times or more. Use of internal rules exemption, which was once among the most frequent used, was almost entirely eliminated with a 92% reduction, part of an ongoing shift from a 2011 Supreme Court ruling that restricted the use of the exemption. However, an increase in the use of interagency memos exemption suggests that some agencies may have expanded its use to withhold records previously claimed as internal rules. This overview of FOIA performance indicates that the changes brought from the Open Government Act and the Obama administration's new FOIA policies have made some positive impact on FOIA implementation. But serious challenges and disparities remain. We would like to offer 6 recommendations to improve FOIA performance: improved compliance efforts, a stronger ombudsman, expanded proactive disclosure, better technology, congressional oversight, and expanded reporting. First, we believe the Justice Department should be more aggressive in overseeing FOIA compliance. There need to be greater incentives for strong performance and stronger penalties for failures to comply. Second, the Office of Government Information Services, created under the Open Government Act, should be expanded and strengthened. OGIS is already having a positive impact on FOIA implementation, and we firmly believe the benefits would be greater if its capacity were increased. Third, we recommend expanding FOIA's proactive disclosure requirements to make more information available without needing to file a request. Agencies should be required to routinely post key information about how they are operating. Agencies should also have to post records already released in response to other FOIA requests. Fourth, agencies should leverage technology to build on the tracking numbers required by the Open Government Act and provide automatic status updates to FOIA requests. Additionally, agencies should be able to receive requests and post responses online. The new interagency portal, FOIA Online, already offers many of these features, and it should continue to be improved, and participation should be expanded to include more agencies. Fifth, Congress should codify the presumption of openness, the foreseeable harm standard, and the affirmative obligation to disclose. We also encourage committees of jurisdiction to continue to exercise assertive oversight into FOIA by holding regular hearings, issuing letters of inquiry, and ordering GAO studies. Finally, we recommend expanded reporting requirements to describe how much information is being withheld under these partial releases, such as a record or page count of what's being released and what's being withheld. Like the committee, the Center for Effective Government is committed to improving FOIA and ensuring that federal agencies provide timely and complete responses to the public's requests for information. I look forward to the committee's questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton. Mr. Goldberg.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I am pleased to represent the Sunshine in Government Initiative and the American Society of News Editors today because I recall how optimistic we all felt almost 8 years ago when we first started working with Congress to reform FOIA. 8 years ago, the starting point for what would become the Open Government Act was Senator Cornyn's desire to create an enforcement mechanism like he had enjoyed as the Attorney General of Texas. Though not everybody may agree that everything's better in Texas, we did think Senator Cornyn was onto something here, and the Austin American-Statesman has actually agreed and proven that. Our optimism grew when President Obama proclaimed that his administration would be the most transparent administration ever. But these 8 years have not brought the desired changes to FOIA processing itself. In the words of what I understand to be Chairman Leahy's favorite Grateful Dead song, the public still sees a black, muddy river that rolls on forever. Why? Well, that's because our original effort was quickly diluted to include several less effective provisions. I will first highlight those that have worked. We believe the Office of Government Information Services has been successful. OGIS has helped avoid bigger disputes and avoid litigation when agencies fail to communicate with requesters. If anything, this office needs more power and resources to perform an enforcement role. We are also pleased with the fix to the so-called Buckhannon tax to make it easier to recover attorney's fees when challenging a FOIA denial in court. There's been a lot of discussion about the increase in litigation. We actually view this as somewhat of a good thing. It's clear evidence that requesters use the Open Government Act to enforce their rights. But excessive secrecy, of course, still remains. Examples include the withholding of Office of Legal Counsel memoranda and a recent change by the U.S. Marshals Service, which has begun ignoring a long-standing federal appellate decision requiring the disclosure of mugshots. The procedural side of processing has also been a mixed bag. The major enforcement element from the Open Government Act, waiving processing fees when an agency fails to meet the 20-day response deadline, has not kept agencies in line. But enforcement issues aside, FOIA processing simply needs an infusion of leadership, resources, and technology. I will praise the administration here. It has not received enough credit for harnessing technology to make processing more efficient. It just needs to go a little further, and it may need some help from Congress to get there. The Justice Department's FOIA.gov website is a step in the right direction. But as Justice Department officials told the GAO last year, FOIA.gov was never intended to manage FOIA requests. It's simply a tool to hold agencies accountable for meeting their FOIA responsibilities. The new multi-agency FOIA Online system offers more promise by creating a freely searchable, online database of already disclosed records that will advance the proactive disclosure of frequently requested records. It will create a streamlined electronic tracking system fulfilling a mandate of the Open Government Act that could save as many as 30 minutes per request by automating the logging and confirmation of requests. Now, if you look at the over 650,000 requests in fiscal year 2012, that would offer a saving of about 325,000 person hours. possibly the equivalent, if you want to look at it this way, of creating 163 new FOIA officers. It's also a mechanism to allow agencies or components of agencies to more freely talk to one another to reduce the tolling of every individual request. So against this backdrop of moderate success, greater disappointment, and vast potential, we ourselves offer 5 steps for congressional action. Number 1, strengthen OGIS by increasing its funding and its independent authority to hold other agencies accountable. 2, hold OGIS itself accountable. OGIS should exercise its advisory opinion power to create a record that requesters themselves can use to hold agencies accountable. 3, hold individuals accountable. Information disclosure should be a part of every federal government employee's overall performance review. 4, codify the disclosure-friendly standard laid out by Attorney General Holder, that information should only be withheld if foreseeable harm would result from its disclosure. And 5, save taxpayers some money by encouraging agencies to switch to FOIA online as their existing software contracts expire. The proposals we suggest are a vital part of Congress's ongoing oversight efforts and are necessary to avoid finding ourselves back here 5, 6, 8 years from now, summing up an unchanged Freedom of Information Act landscape with the lamentations of one of my musical icons, Bruce Springsteen, who wrote, "Somewhere along the line, we slipped off track, going 1 step up and 2 steps back." Mr. Chairman, we appreciate working with you to ensure transparency moves 2 steps forward for every step back. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Blanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and all the terrific committee staff who've helped make this hearing happen and this oversight happen. It's a lot of work, I know. I have a prepared statement already for the record, and I've also brought copies of the brand new Freedom of Information Act audit that we just posted this morning to celebrate this hearing and Sunshine Week. It has some new numbers that might correct the numbers that Senator Leahy and Senator Grassley had on the number of agencies. But I want to use the limited time here just to address the Justice Department presentation, which I wish we had Glenn Kessler of the Washington Post in his renowned fact-checker column with us, because while that presentation was happening, I could just see the little symbols of the Pinocchios just hitting the page, because the stretches that were involved there were really extraordinary. I think the Justice Department might be the only player in the entire freedom of information environment that thinks new regulations are just optional. You don't really need them to make the system work. You go to any training session of government freedom of information officers, and the senior folks up on the podium say, guys, look at your regs. That's the basis of your implementation. Don't worry about the statute and that AG memo. Don't worry about that. Your regs, that's what counts. So having a list of agencies, this is the red, that have not updated their regulations since Congress passed the Open Government Act of 2007 it's a tragedy and a farce. The folks who disagree with the Justice Department on the need for new regs include federal judges who ruled against the government in the National Park Service case because the agency involved hadn't updated its regs to charge fees. The folks that disagree include former Attorney General Janet Reno, who when she did a memo to the agencies to try to get a presumption of openness in there, she said, change your regs to fit the new policy. This Attorney General failed in a memo drafted by that office of the folks who were just testifying. The people who disagree with the Justice Department include the entire open government community that see new across-the-board regs as the opportunity for this Congress and this administration to really bring everybody up to the standard of openness that we need to expect. Among the folks who disagree but are way too polite to say so is the Office of Government Information Services, because OGIS has done a systematic effort to comment on every new agency FOIA regulation proposal, because it's vital for OGIS's success that they be mentioned in those regs as a core resort for every requester and for every agency to figure out disputes. So the entire community of folks on government and requesters who care about Freedom of Information Act disagree with the Justice Department on this, and yet that piece of litigation that she wouldn't comment on is the most direct attack by this government on the Open Government Act of 2007. They're attempting to eviscerate the one single enforcement provision, which is you can't charge fees if you delay your answer. It was very simple. Senator Cornyn and Senator Leahy's idea is a great idea. It's one of the first piece of teeth that we've seen in the law anytime, anywhere. Justice Department is trying to gut that out. That's why they won't comment on that law. It's absurd. There's never been a litigation review by the Justice Department to look at what the Attorney General or the President is saying about open government and trying to look at those cases and figure out what can we settle, what can we get rid of, what can we disclose. That's why litigation is going up, not down. Despite the best efforts of OJIS, which is dramatically, I think, improving the requester experience with the freedom of information process. And then another Pinocchio, that release rate. I think I heard it 5 times in that presentation, 94% release rate. The only way the Department of Justice gets to that number is by leaving out 9 of the 11 reasons the government doesn't answer your FOIA requests. Those other 9 reasons are fee-related issues that don't get resolved, or the agency has a no records response, or it sends the request to another agency for a referral. If you add in those reasons why FOIA requesters go away unsatisfied, your actual response rate gets down to a more pedestrian, more realistic 55, 60% roughly. So that's the kind of numbers we ought to be getting out of the Justice Department. We're not getting them. We're getting hyped up numbers that you can't really rely on. You're getting a secret sneak attack on the Open Government Act in the courts. And you're getting claims that just don't hold scrutiny. You get no implementation on new freedom of information regulations. So I could say it's bad news, but we've had 3 agencies just since December who've updated their regs and have been added into the green side of our ledger. But as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, updated regs don't necessarily mean good regs, because only one of those 3 agencies actually included OJIS in their regulations, language about dispute resolution. We got to do more. We got to order agencies to update their regs along best practices template. In my written statement, I've got top 10 best practices we think ought to be in every reg. OJIS itself is in a series of excellent comments on different proposed regulations that talk about how agencies should be running their processes to make them better, to make them more responsive, to avoid disputes and litigation. Congress could order this. There's some energy over on the House side. The Isa Cummings bill that Senator Grassley mentioned actually would order agencies to do this within 180 days. It doesn't take 2 years. It doesn't take 3 years. The reason the Justice Department is still struggling with its own regulations is its first draft was so bad that all of us had to gather and put a stake through the heart to keep that set of regulations in the casket so it wouldn't come out and bite us at night. Terrible regulations, and I hope that the new ones aren't likely to be a better model either. So Congress got an opportunity. I think the President has a real opportunity. We've advocated that President Obama put this in the next action plan for the Open Government Partnership, that agencies should update their regulations and include these best practices and the excellent suggestions that Kevin and Sean and many others in our community are making. I'm just really glad that this committee has decided to take on this issue, to have this oversight, and to bring some pressure to bear. And my final point would be, and I wish Senator Leahy was here, Senator Grassley, they talked about maybe doing a subpoena for those Office of Legal Counsel memos. I think the next nominee for a Justice Department confirmation position that comes up here ought to be told that, I'm sorry, your confirmation is not going to go through until you turn over the OLC memos. I think maybe Senator Leahy sits on an appropriations committee. I just remember when a Secretary of State named Jim Baker showed up in front of the Appropriations Committee, and Senator Leahy said, don't you have a big FOIA backlog? And Secretary Baker went back to the department and found $2 million to clean out the backlog. It takes some pressure, it takes the leverage of money, it takes holding up some confirmations, and yeah, it might take a subpoena. But I'd love the opportunity, and I ask your patience, Mr. Chairman, if we could also submit some further comments to the record just to take into account the responses of the Justice Department, which I think are part of the problem. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's just, I'd like Mr. Moulton and Mr. Goldberg to, your reaction to Mr. Blanton's testimony there. I mean, he was basically saying, when he's talking Pinocchios, he's talking, that's what we know what Pinocchio did. He lied. And so, well, the nose stretched because he lied. So let's be clear about what you're saying, which is that the testimony of the first 2 witnesses was not truthful.
Not the first 2 witnesses, just the first.
Oh, the first witness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you gentlemen have any reaction to that?
I was disappointed by Ms. Poustey's testimony because I felt it was extremely one-sided. was very serpentine in bending over backwards to find all the highlights and all the positives, and talked about none of the clear weaknesses, and I do think there was some omission on those points. The high release rate, even if you don't adjust, or even if you do adjust for these other reasons that people go away, or that the request doesn't get processed.
So the release rate throughout those that were denied because of some of the normal reasons to exempt things. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, Tom's talking about.
So is that a normal way to look at the release rate, to take out those that are exempted because of the list of normal exemptions?
It is a way, and there is a certain validity to it if you are trying to figure out the exemptions and how often the exemptions are being used, because the others are not about exemptions. They're about disagreements on fees. There are still, as Tom's pointing out, very big concerns in these other denials as to whether or not the system is still being gamed.
So you said in your testimony, in the list of improvements that need to be made, is one was improvement by Congress and oversight.
Yes.
So how would you suggest that we do that?
Well, I think Tom is raising some good points about really holding the Department of Justice's feet to the fire in terms of their follow-through with their responsibility to oversee agencies, their regulations, and their compliance with the law and the mandate to respond to requests substantively inside the statutory 20-day deadline.
Now, Mr. Blanton was recommending, it sounded like, more resources put toward ending the backlog, or just in terms of fixing some of these problems, and holding up a nomination toward that end. We are currently under sequester, and we do have budgetary limits, and I'm not sure that we would want to hold up a nomination by demanding that more resources be applied when we're kicking kids off of Head Start and we're limiting women, infant, and children in their food. Would you like to say something?
In Kevin Goldberg's testimony, he has a wonderful suggestion for dealing with exactly this problem, which is if the FOIA online portal really reached its full potential, it would be the equivalent in time savings on Freedom of Information requests of adding 163 new Freedom of Information officers without a single additional dollar of our resources being devoted. I think this goes right to the heart of why the new technologies can address some of these issues without us getting caught in the resource trap that we're all very well aware of.
Mr. Goldberg?
Oh, thank you, Tom. I should just stop there. I can't possibly speak with more authority than either of these gentlemen on that topic. I'll just hit three things that stood out to me. I wasn't going to jump all over the lack of agency implementation of the Open Government Act changes, but then I think I will. And because something was running through my head with regard to the idea that Congress shouldn't, or I'm sorry, the agency shouldn't be required to do this because it wasn't required, in the law itself. And a problem with that is that some of the regs are actually now out of sync with the changes in the Act. They were wholesale changes that now create a conflict. That sort of demands it.
The new regs that have been promulgated, or the
the regulations that weren't changed,
okay.
And then the Act changed. Once the Act was changed, the language of the law itself, you have regs that are in conflict and simply need to be changed. And I don't buy the idea that you should be required to make a change before you make the change. I have the words of my wife ringing in my ears right now, and I'm going to go on record under oath saying, Brenda, I love you, you're right. I shouldn't have to be asked to take out the trash. You know, that I get that all the time. I shouldn't have to ask you to do this. And it's true. If you view the interaction between the agencies.
Jerry Garcia, Bruce Springsteen, and your wife.
I'm trying to cover all my
Now
bases
in
here.
the
Well, no, I mean, if you think about the interplay between the agencies as a relationship, the relationship will work better if everybody works to their potential and does things voluntarily to help out. They shouldn't have to wait for the others to press them on it. We all know it's true. You know, and I'll go out as well on one last topic back to the oversight, which is I do think oversight from this committee and from the House committee and from any committee that can possibly oversee FOIA is incredibly important. We come up here once a year quite often for a very important hearing during a very important, to me, week, since AS&E is one of the creators of Sunshine Week. And I think that's good. But you hear a lot of statements, you hear a lot of promises, and then there's not a lot of follow-through to make sure those promises have been met until the next year. I think the letter from Chairman Issa and Representative Cummings was a very good example of how to hold people's feet to the fire. Listen to what was said. Go back through the testimony. Look at what they've promised. Look at where they're saying they're making progress. And specifically hone in on that and make sure they've kept those promises. That's what I would do.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. And I will note that we will hold the record open for 1 week for submissions of questions for the witnesses and for other materials. I want to thank the ranking member and Senator Cornyn and the chairman for being here today, and this hearing is now adjourned.